"Save your breath," laughed Merry. "I've a better." Then, lifting up his silver horn, he winded it, and its clear call rang over the hill, and out of the holes and sheds and shabby houses of Hobbiton, the hobbits answered, and came pouring out, and with cheers and loud cries they followed the company up the road to Bag End. Hey everyone, Yoyston here, and I hope you all are doing well, wherever you are in Middle-earth. Today we are looking at Merry Brandybuck the Magnificent, his life and his story. With this video, each member of the Fellowship should have an epic character history, and I'll make a playlist with all of them included. For more info on Merry, check out the articles and videos in the description and cards. My friends, thank you all so much for joining me here today. Let's begin our tale. Born in 2982 of the Third Age to Saradoc Brandybuck and Esmerella Took, Meriadoc or Merry was the sole heir of the Master of Buckland, and yet he also had Tookish blood, as he was first cousins with Peregrine Took Pippin, and one could also trace Merry's family tree to Frodo and Bilbo. Merry grew up in Buckland, which was in the southeast part of the Shire, but it seems that he also was a rather exploratory hobbit, having early adventures that took him into the Marish to befriend Farmer Maggot, and he would visit Tookland and Hobbiton from time to time. These adventures would give him a sort of wisdom of the land, which would come in use later. Indeed, in 3000 of the Third Age, when Merry was only 18 years old, still quite youthful according to Hobbit tradition, he would see his distant relative Bilbo Baggins turn invisible to avoid the Sackville Bagginses, and then he saw Bilbo reappear, putting a glint of gold in his pocket, all within the sight of Merry. Merry would be confounded by this and would even sneak a look at Bilbo's memoir There and Back Again. Thus he became one of the only hobbits with knowledge about Bilbo's special artifact, and he would be less confused than the other hobbits when, a year later, during Bilbo's birthday, the old hobbit disappeared and was not seen in the Shire again. However, Merry kept this knowledge to himself for quite a long time, proving his collected, methodical, and wise nature as a hobbit. He would aid Frodo after the party in seeing Bilbo's gifts to others, and would be a confidant of the new ring-bearer for years to come. Indeed, for years he would keep an eye on things, helping his good friend Frodo quite often. Knowing that Frodo was like Bilbo, he knew that Frodo would eventually follow him sooner or later and leave the Shire, and so Merry made a group of conspirators to watch and aid Frodo, even without Frodo's knowledge. This group consisted of Samwise Gamgee, Frodo's gardener and the chief investigator, Pippin, Fredegar Bolger, and Merry. Eventually, in 3018, when Merry was 36 years old, Frodo finally made the move to sell Bag End and buy Crickhollow. Yet the group knew this was a ploy for Frodo to leave the Shire without raising suspicions, and Merry helped with this, helping prepare Crickhollow, and even preparing rations and ponies for their adventure after Frodo's move to Buckland. Merry's wisdom even saw him cross the Brandywine and find Frodo, Sam, and Pippin in dense fog. Once the hobbits had all reached Crickhollow, the conspiracy was unmasked, and other than Fredegar Bolger, who would keep watch at Crickhollow, the others would go with Frodo wherever it was he was bound for. Now we see even at this point in the tale, Merry seems to be the most shrewd and restrained out of the four hobbits, but some of this would fade once Merry got out into the wider world and knew not what awaited him. We see this in the Old Forest, for instance, for even though Merry grew up nearby and knew it better than the others, he would still be captured by Old Man Willow and later by the Barrow-wight in the Barrow Downs, both times being saved by Tom Bombadil. In the Barrow Downs, Merry would be given by Tom a dagger of Westernesse, one forged by the Dunedain of Cardolan in the war against the Witch King. Little did Merry know that this dagger would actually deliver massive damage to the Witch King himself, later in his story. Anyway, speaking of the Witch King, Merry would also have a close encounter with a Nazgul after the friends reached Bree, and Merry saw a black rider and was taken by the Black Breath and fainted, only to be saved by the Hobbit employee of the Prancing Pony named Nob. Merry returned to his friends and the Ranger Strider in the inn to offer a warning about what had happened. During the adventure and even after Frodo was stabbed by the Witch King near Weathertop, Merry continued to be the most insightful of the hobbits, aiding Strider and the others where he could. In this, I think Merry really gave Pippin someone to always look up to, and to be more like, as Pippin would go from foolish to courageous throughout the adventure of the tale. Indeed, despite Elrond's hesitation later at Rivendell, Merry and Pippin would be the final members of the Fellowship of the Ring, as Gandalf knew they had great deeds to accomplish in front of them. Yet Merry was going into paths unknown to him, alongside people that were stronger, wiser, and more knowledgeable than he was. For a time, it was the best he could do to just follow along and aid the company where he could, and not get them all into trouble. In truth, the next time Merry would really stand out and take more independent action would be after the death of Boromir, who was trying to defend Merry and Pippin, and the two hobbits were captured by orcs and Uruk-hai, whom they encountered while looking for Frodo near Amanhen. During the skirmish in which they were captured, Merry would even cut off orcish hands and arms that tried to take hold of him, but the hobbits were captured in the end. Merry's head would be injured in the capture, and would be healed in orcish ways later, which would leave a scar there. Pippin, using more of his wit, would later attempt to buy time and trick the orc Grishnach into believing that Pippin had the One Ring, even doing a Gollum impression, and Merry went along with his cousin's wit, aiding him. The two would incidentally be saved by an attack on the orcs from the Riders of Rohan, and they would journey into the Fangorn Forest, coming to meet the Ent Treebeard and the White Rider. Now, being away from the Fellowship and on his own, Merry's intuition, alongside Pippin's increasing wit, would be important for their continued survival and making friends with the Ents. Indeed, alongside Pippin, Merry would introduce the knowledge about hobbits to Treebeard and stir him to have an Entmoot with the other Ents in dealing with Sauron and Isengard. Merry and Pippin would both drink Entdraught and become taller than any other hobbits in history, which would certainly aid Merry in becoming a Knight of Rohan. Indeed, the two hobbits went on to help in the destruction of Isengard alongside the Ents, enjoying some of Sauron's hobbitish provisions and pipeweed afterwards. The two would catch up with the three hunters and their new friends among the Rohirrim. Merry would especially take a liking to Theoden King, as the two had very similar senses and wisdom and love of herb lore. Indeed, they would bond over this, and this new friendship would carry into the coming weeks of March in 3019, as, after the dialogue between Gandalf and Sauron, and Pippin's look into the Palantir of Orthanc, Merry would be left in this foreign land with strangers, but he still wanted to help his friends. Theoden took Merry as a friend and esquire, outfitting him with Rohirric helm, being as a father to the hobbit for a little while. Merry would be lent the pony Staiba, who would carry him alongside the Rohirrim who went to muster at Dunharrow. Merry then met the shield maiden Eowyn, niece of the king, and he saw that she was fair but struck by some ailment. The king and his kin and closest allies took counsel and had a meal, and Merry was welcomed by the side of the king. And it became Theoden's hope to hear from Merry about the Shire and its herb lore and tales. Yet they were in dire times, and such things would have to wait, for a man of Gondor, who Merry thought for a moment was Boromir returned to life, came with the Red Arrow, calling upon Rohan for aid. Theoden and his people would go, but Merry was to stay at Edoras by order of the king, for Theoden did not want Merry to burden any of his riders. I also believe Theoden wanted to keep the hobbits safe, not knowing the aid that Merry would be able to give. However, like the hobbit, Eowyn wanted to achieve valor in combat and aid her folk, but was not allowed to come. So, dressing as a man of Rohan named Durnhelm, Eowyn took Merry on her steed Windfalla, and the two went with the Rohirrim to Gondor. They rode into the Battle of the Pelennor Fields together, and Merry only discovered that Durnhelm was Eowyn when she stood against the Witch King herself, and unveiled her true nature. Overcome with the Black Breath once again and recovering from falling from Windfalla, he thought one so fair should not die, at least not alone. And his blade of Westerness found its destiny in the knee of the Witch King, weakening the Nazgul enough to be slain by Eowyn. Just as around that same time, Pippin had saved Eowyn's future husband Faramir, Merry had saved Eowyn, but his blade burned away. The shield maiden fell, but Merry's action saved her, and Merry's arm that dealt the blow to the Lord of the Nine was numb and useless. Merry went to the king who was dying, the man he saw as a father, and he begged Theoden's forgiveness for breaking his command, and Theoden forgave him, commending his heart. For a time, even after the king passed, Merry stayed with him, but he would eventually become lost and ill in Minas Tirith. Merry's health was failing, but he was found by a guard of the citadel of Gondor, and one he knew well, Pippin, and then by Gandalf too. And Merry would be brought to the Houses of Healing, and Gandalf was glad indeed for bringing both hobbits from Rivendell, as that day would have gone very ill indeed without Merry and Pippin there. Merry's ailments, the Black Breath and the wound from stabbing the Witch King, would be healed by Aragorn, and after his revival, Merry asked for dinner and a pipe, true implements of a hobbit. Yet the pipe and smoking reminded him of Theoden, to which Aragorn said Merry should smoke, and he should think of Theoden. Merry would spend time recovering in the Houses of Healing, catching up with Pippin, Legolas, and Gimli for a time as well. But that Rider of Rohan would not go with the host of the West to the Black Gate, for his great deed in aiding in the defeat of the Witch King still saw him in need of recovery. Merry would stay in the Houses of Healing, and he would meet Faramir, who asked him about Éowyn. During his recovery, the ring would be destroyed and the West would have victory. He would ride to the field of Cormallen to reunite with his Hobbit friends, and he achieved great honor thereafter. He would stay with his friends and attend the funeral of Theoden, during which he wept greatly, and he would be named Holdwine by the Rohirrim, meaning faithful friend. And from Éomer and Éowyn he received a horn, which had once come from the hoard of Scatha the dragon. Likely, Merry was also given a new blade, as he would use this to free his home. Indeed, after journeying with the remainder of the Fellowship for a time and seeing Treebeard once more, many farewells would be said, and Merry with his 3 Hobbit friends would return at last to the Shire, which had been overcome by ruffians. In the retaking of the Shire from Sauron, Merry and Pippin would be the commanders of the Hobbit forces against the brigands, and the sound of Merry's horn from Rohan could be heard in rallying the hobbits to his aid. Merry himself would slay the ruffian leader, who had features like an orc. In the end, the Shire would be saved, and Merry would help see to its restoration. After all of this, Merry and Pippin would stay in Crickhollow and Buckland for a time, and he would marry Fredegar Bolger's sister, Estella, and they would have at least one son together. Of course, Merry would be present at the Grey Havens to bid farewell to Frodo, Bilbo, Gandalf, and the others, but Merry still had much to do in Middle-earth. He would become known as Meriadoc the Magnificent, becoming also the Master of Buckland when that title passed to him. He received gifts from Rohan, and would eventually become a counselor of the North Kingdom of Arnor under the rule of King Elisar. Furthermore, Merry aided in the extended works of the Red Book, or rather the Thane's Book, its copy, and wrote the herb lore of the Shire, the reckoning of years, and old words and names in the Shire. Eventually, in 63 of the Fourth Age, when Merry was 102 years old, he would receive an invitation to come to Rohan by Éomer King, who wished to see Master Hobbitla once more before he passed away. Merry and Pippin, along with their copy of the Thane's Book, resigned and left their titles and positions to their children, and made the last journey south to Rohan, and then on to Gondor after Éomer's passing. There, in Minas Tirith, they spent their final years until their passing, and Merry and Pippin were laid to rest in Rath Dinen, and after Aragorn, King Elisar died, he would also be laid next to his Hobbit companions of old. Merry's deeds, those he accomplished by having a stout heart and by being valiant, helped his friends and saw more of the history of Middle-earth recorded in the Thane's Book. He also helped see to the end of an ancient evil, the Lord of the Nazgul. And of course, he freed his people in the scouring of the Shire. And like the rest of the Fellowship, he would never be forgotten, and would be remembered as a hero from the Shire. Thus we come to the end of our tale about Merry Brandybuck. From the tale of Merry, we see that wisdom, valor, and the desire to aid our friends in every moment can really go a long way in the great deeds of the world. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed this epic character history on Merry. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and share this with a friend. What are your thoughts on Merry and his history? Let me know in the comments below. Merry is an interesting character and hobbit, as he is very knowledgeable and quick-minded. So too is he methodical when necessary and valiant as a warrior. From conspiracy mastermind in Crickhollow to hero of the Pelennor Fields, he does what he deems to be necessary in each moment, and such acts really help all of those around him. Thanks to our Valar tier patrons, Adrian De la Torre, Chris Ortner, Kyle Wetzel, Peter Sheppard, Jonathan Putnam, Mark Kralick, Blair Scouten, Merten, John Hume, Sam McBee, Matt Sibbach, Elizabeth Calvert, Maz Gibbs, Ben Gardner, Condar, Rhys Jenkins, Adam Petrlik, Khuzan, Brandon Glidden, Molly Sullivan, Daniel Burns, Anthony Harmon, Dorwin Gray, and Trey Eichenberg and Arthur, our newest Valar tier patrons. Thank you so much, and thanks to all of our patrons and YouTube members. Please subscribe and hit that bell button to join the Men of the West and all of the Free Peoples today. I'll see you all again next week with a theory on what if Gandalf did not fall with the Balrog. You all are the best, my friends. Thank you so much for joining me on this adventure. Until the next one.